You can roughly locate any community in the world, somewhere along a scale running all the way from democracy to despotism. One to the democracy end, another somewhere in the middle, and a third.
When a competent observer looks for signs of despotism in a community, he looks beyond fine words and noble phrases.
For which it stands, one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Many observers have found that two workable yardsticks help in discovering how near a community is to despotism: the respect scale and the power scale.
A careful observer can use a respect scale to find how many citizens get an even break. As a community moves towards despotism, respect is restricted to fewer people. A power scale is another important yardstick of despotism. It gauges the citizens' share in making the community's decisions. Communities which concentrate decision-making in a few hands rate low on a power scale and are moving towards despotism. Like France under the Bourbon kings, one of whom said, "The state, I am the state." Today, democracy can ebb away in communities whose citizens allow power to become concentrated in the hands of bosses.
What I say goes, see? I'm the law around here.
The test of despotic power is that it can disregard the will of the people. It rules without the consent of the governed.
This is an incredibly concentrated industry. 0.14% of the world's population, less than 10 million people, control about 95% of the offshore private wealth. They're citizens of nowhere. In the interests of this underlying group at the very top of the global economic order that has come to have more influence than ever in the last 20 years under the impact of globalization, their interests, I think, are fundamentally at odds with the interests of the rest of us in shared tax institutions, in shared bank regulation institutions across borders. They've been able to game this.
If a community's economic distribution becomes slanted, its middle-income groups grow smaller, and despotism stands a better chance to gain a foothold. A community rates low on an information scale when the press, radio, and other channels of communication are controlled by only a few people, and when citizens have to accept what they're told. In communities of this kind, despotism stands a good chance.
I mean, you want to disappear. If you want to, I mean, this is what you have to become almost invisible. And this is the way that you can protect yourself and keep the financial police or the tax man or the media off your back. It's an internal world going on. It's a sort of world in itself. It's an inside, secret kind of realm.
So, if I would be a billionaire and I don't want to pay tax, what do I do?
If you're a billionaire, you don't have any contact with money at all. You may have some special issued black credit card that you can only use in an ATM in Monaco or something. But what you do is rather like the way that the criminal erases his traces. You make yourself invisible. You don't have any contact with money. This is all happening behind the scenes. Nothing has got your name on it. Yeah?
Another sign of a poorly balanced economy is a taxation system that presses heaviest on those least able to pay. A larger part of a small income is spent on necessities such as food. Sales taxes on such necessities hit the small income harder.
If tax havens are going to be used by wealthy people, and if it is going to be used by multinational companies, then they need to be serviced by familiar advisors. And the familiar advisors are always going to be the big four firms of accountants: PricewaterhouseCoopers, KPMG, Ernst & Young, Deloitte. They are the constant feature of every tax haven, in fact. Without one of those firms, or maybe all of those firms being present, you really will not have a tax haven. But you'll find all the familiar names of banks, whether they are British or they are Dutch or they are French or they are US. So Citigroup will be virtually everywhere. Deutsche will be virtually everywhere. So consistently the same accountants, consistently the same banks, and always lawyers to support them. Without those three things, you can't really have a tax haven. The UK or anywhere were signed off by a big four firm of accountants as being true and fair. Now, why weren't those accountants criticised for signing off accounts which clearly were not true and fair, because these banks were basically bust? But they've got away with it. One of the problems that we have when we look at the role, for example, of the accountants is that there is nobody who judges the accountants. In fact, so powerful is their position that we now see them, far from being regulated, instead they're taking over the regulators. So in the UK, the new chairman of our tax authority is the former senior partner of KPMG in this country. The same thing is happening in Australia. Literally, a KPMG person is taking over at the tax authority. Very many governments are looking at privatisation. Who do they look to prepare the reports on their privatised businesses? Well, it's the big four firms of accountants. If they want advice on how to reorganise their tax systems, they set up a committee and call in the experts. The belief is that in total, US corporations now have well over $1 trillion of money stored in the likes of Bermuda. This money cannot go to the shareholders of these companies because it would have to go through the US parent company. I believe that the shares in these companies are seriously overvalued, because if the value was ever to eventually get to the shareholder, significant extra tax bills would be payable, which would inevitably bring the share price down. So we're seeing market distortions as a result of this. The only good news is that they've actually got to do something with this money, and they're lending it to governments to pay for the deficits that most countries around the world are running. So mysteriously, tax havens are funding the deficits which governments are running because they can't collect enough cash in the form of tax from companies because they're hiding it in tax havens. So we go round in a giant circle here, where these companies are lending this money to governments instead of paying it in tax to make sure that the whole world system keeps going. It's bizarre, but that's what is going on. A political party that wants to go and say, I will raise tax to clear our deficit, faces this enormous pressure from multinational corporations who say, we'll walk out of the door, whether they would or wouldn't. All of that means that the options available to government to actually go forward to generate new growth to meet the needs of their electorates is being undermined. And therefore this is, frankly, threatening democracy, in my opinion. And therefore this is, frankly, threatening democracy.